Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast welcomes Mark Bauerlein, senior editor at First Things, a professor emeritus of English at Emory University, author of the new book, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, From Stupefied Youth to Dangerous Adults. And Mark Bauerlein, welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Rob, I'm glad to join you.
Let's talk about the dumbest generation, because this is your second pass at this generation, worthy of two books and maybe many more. Who are they?
Back in 2008, I did the first book. The full title was The Dumbest Generation, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future, or Don't Trust Anyone Under 30. And I was talking about the millennials back then. They were teenagers, for the most part, in the aughts, the 2000s. Millennials are born roughly early 80s up to maybe 2000. And back then, there was all this cheerleading for the millennials going on. They were so good with the tools. They were the early adopters, the digital natives. They would run circles around us boomers when it came to these fresh devices. They were getting into social media, which is just kicking in back then, Facebook and MySpace, and then Twitter came along. Instagram wouldn't be long in coming. The new iPhones, all the texting that they would do. And this was taken as a great generation on the move, outfitted like no generation had been before. They had all the universe of knowledge at their fingertips. They were going to college in record numbers. They had great progressive, tolerant attitude. They helped elect our first African-American president, and they were going to transform the workplace. And we got things like a 60 Minutes episode, Here Come the Millennials. And I thought to myself, no, this is very bad for a 15-year-old to walk around with 200 pictures of himself in his pocket. Not good. I would go to the library, and every computer terminal was occupied with some fresh-faced, smiling student, and I'd go up to the stacks, and it was like a morgue. So I wrote that book to say this is not going to go well. They're wrapping themselves in peer culture, peer pressure, youth stuff, and they're not getting the sort of infiltration of history and politics and better music and some good novels and great role models. That 15 years later, it's not going to look good. Well, that book came out. It got quite a bit of notice. And the main response from teachers and intellectuals and journalists was, here comes another Luddite. You know, now, Grandpa, get off my lawn, curmudgeon. We've been hearing this forever. And my response was, you're darn right. You know, I mean, we need a little stern elder to break through this teen bubble that they've created, and we're going to see 15 years from now. So I've done this update. The dumbest generation grows up, from stupefied youth to dangerous adults. And the idea there is 33 years old, and what we see is a lot of bitterness and disappointment among millennials. They've had some shocks with the financial meltdown, a lot of instability in American society, and college debt, healthcare costs, but they don't have the equipment to manage these things. They're not religious, really. The nuns phenomenon is rising. They don't have much devotion to country. They don't have a strong family sense, because they're not getting married and having children at nearly the rate that boomers did. They're not really invested in their jobs, high levels of job dissatisfaction. And as for their social attitudes, and this is self-reported in surveys, they're actually more intolerant than older generations. They have high levels of social mistrust. They generally suspect their fellow citizens and fellow workers. And they also have a pretty vindictive sense of life. If they see some little injustice going on, a microaggression taking place, they really want that person to suffer. They want the punishment to happen, and that's where their fondness of cancel culture comes in. So I'll stop there with that quick summary, Rob, and let you jump in.
So this is really interesting, and I look at the title, The Dumbest Generation, and I really do think it's true. Now, I know some very sharp millennials, but I think they're the exception. Many of them I would classify as dumb, but they don't even seem to know they're dumb. In fact, they think they're really smart, and this is disturbing for someone from another generation to look on and see them thinking so highly of themselves when this is so destructive.
You know, they were told that building up a big Facebook network shows their adept, acute intelligence. They would be very, very good at some of these video games, some of which very sophisticated. They could do clever little videos on now TikTok, and it fed the ego, the adolescent ego. But you know, Rob, if they didn't read great novels, great stories, tales of love and honor and betrayal and sacrifice, if they didn't have some more serious habits, prayer, for instance, worked into their lives, if they don't know a lot of history, like what actually happened at Shiloh and Gettysburg, if they don't know the great failures in human history, the great villains, as well as the great heroes, the great acts of self-sacrifice, they don't have a context for understanding how thin their sense of things really is. They don't understand the complexity of human motive. They live in stereotypes. Like, you're racist, you're sexist. Those are such flat and dead-end characterizations that really don't probe further into understanding human behavior. They went and tore down the statues, you know, some Confederate statues, but also other statues. And if you ask them questions about those people that they tore down, they don't know very much. It's more just this nihilistic impulse against the past. And I see that as an expression of their own rootlessness. They don't have any legacy of which they can feel pride. They don't feel like they stand in the shadow of greatness and genius and beauty and sublimity. And that's where I turn to us. You know, one of the last chapters book is called The Betrayal of the Mentors. And the first sentence of this book is, what have we done to them? We didn't insist that they pull away from those phones and read the story and talk about the story of Frederick Douglass growing up in slavery, or Gatsby and his foolish but somehow tragic and elevated love for Daisy. They don't have that reservoir, that background. They haven't had encounters with great inspirations. They don't have the role models. When they look on, the stuff they consume, how many of those show just people acting in silly or outrageous or abominable, degrading ways? These are the entertainments that they absorb. So I think that they've been given a universe that is dispiriting, not inspiring. And this is why they're acting out, joining marches and smashing windows. Donald Trump got elected and they went ape. Now, I understand you're angry about that election, but you live in an open society. Sometimes you lose. You guys, do you think you never have to lose? And so, no, we don't lose. We never should lose because we're the good people. We have the right ideas. Those people over there, they're awful. They should lose every single time. This is politics. I mean, people were upset when Teddy Roosevelt landed in the White House. Said, oh my goodness, what the heck is he going to be doing in there? The false reality they absorbed when they were able to go into their bedrooms at age 15, shut the door, turn on all the tools, play the video games, have the TV going. They haven't reduced their TV time. Send out the pictures and text and create this little youth bubble. What a wonderful place that was. Everything was answerable. Their desires, their interests, their fun. They had their little communities. And they just don't understand the world doesn't work that way. And again, I point, that's our fault, Rob. The teachers, a lot of parents, any people in the supervisory position of the young. You know, the top 10% of the millennials, they did get that, and they're amazing. They're super workers, very motivated, but you get out of that very top elite group and things go down very quickly.
Indeed, they do. And so it's interesting that you would bring up the removal of the Confederate statues and others, because we're broadcasting here from Charlottesville. And we had not only Confederate statues, but statue of Lewis and Clark taken down, both by the University of Virginia and the city of Charlottesville. And I think about the comments surrounding these, and you talked about how they're just so insulated from history. So they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know about Robert E. Lee or Lewis and Clark, but they don't care to know. So how do you deal with that?
You know, there's a certain arrogance that goes with youth, right? And where I was this way when I was an adolescent. I knew it all when I was 16. And this is where it's so important for the elders to step in and become that little rebuke voice. Hey, you don't know what you're talking about. You ever paid any taxes, youngster? Huh? I was there, you know, at such and such 20 years before. You weren't there. You don't know what really happened. I mean, that's that grumpy curmudgeon sound coming from the elders that they need to hear. And, you know, Rob, it's okay for the young to resent that, to say, you know, there's a lot going on, sir, that you really don't know. You're so grooved. You haven't absorbed a lot of new novelties, innovations taking place. That interaction helps curb precisely the attitude that you just mentioned, Robbie. I don't know, and I don't want to know. You know, I don't need to know because I already know what's good. I already know what's right. I don't need to learn any lessons from history. You want to say, do you know what a monumental achievement it was by Lewis and Clark to make that journey? Do you know, I mean, it was years it took them to do this. I mean, the labor that they underwent on this great exploration. I mean, this is something before you start to tear down the monuments, try experiencing, even in your imagination, what it was like to be a soldier at Shiloh. Just try to imagine being an officer and having to lead men on a charge, running into cannon fire. You've got to try to use your what's called cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is not when you sympathize with someone. Cognitive empathy is just the capacity to get inside someone else's head and imagine the thoughts and impulses going on. Even a villain, you've got to try to understand what people are thinking and feeling, not just categorize and label them and then move on. Human existence is more complicated than that, and your simplicities are dangerous. And this is why I say the dangerous adults. Rob, you talk about the tearing down statues when you don't know anything real about the person in that statue. That's a dangerous thing for our civic sphere. When you're willing to sign a petition with 2,000 other people to get a stranger who lives 500 miles away from you, to get a stranger fired from a job for telling some dumb racial joke on social media, that's dangerous. I mean, I even see my own colleagues in academia. They're professors. They're liberal. You know, they're always going to vote Democrat. They hated Donald Trump. Most of them are actually moderate, reasonable people who sympathize with the left, but they're not radical leftists themselves. They're nervous because they know that the young in their classes could take offense It's something that they didn't take offense at 10 years earlier. I mean, who would have thought, if I said to my professor colleagues across the country 10 years ago, you're going to have to start being very careful about how you use pronouns. They would have said, oh, what kind of alarmism is this? Conspiracy theorists? No, this is where we are. And they're nervous. Political correctness has never been worse than it is on college campus. And it's punitive. There's something very ungenerous, merciless about the woke sensibility. And again, the young are leading the way on this.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues with Mark Bauerlein in just a moment.
Support this podcast online at shillingshow.com.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border, as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Looking out for us. Rob Shub.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues now with Mark Bauerlein. The new book is The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, From Stupefied Youth to Dangerous Adults. And it is so dangerous as we see attacks on our fundamental constitutional rights, such as the First Amendment, but many others, under the guise of making us, a safer nation or a more pleasant place to be?
Everyone deserves to be happy. Love is love. Don't make anyone feel uncomfortable or offended, except for those people who need to be made, need to be canceled. This really is this kind of utopian outlook among the young. They don't see why the world is a tough place. They don't see why people should be made to feel unhappy. And, utopians always have a solution for why the world isn't the way the world is supposed to be. It's because there are some bad people out there. And if we get rid of the bad people, well, then the world will become what it ought to be. Everyone will be happy. And so I talk in the book about these rosy beliefs. For example, I talk about overhearing one little episode where a millennial saying, it doesn't matter who you love. It doesn't matter. She's singing a song. It doesn't matter with kids. It doesn't matter who you love. Well, yes, it does matter who you love. I mean, many people love the wrong individual. The woman who gets beaten up by her husband, police come and arrest him. A few days later, she drops the charges. Why? Because she loves him. This is a very destructive, damaging, twisted form of love. And that's one of those complications of human behavior that the millennials do not wish to absorb. They want to believe that we're all good, innocent people until those bad people who want to discriminate against others come and bring evil into the world. Well, they're innocent, and what they do then is good, because innocent people don't do bad things. They can't absorb that fact. I mean, this is part of the tragic condition. Some people do very bad things, genuinely believing that they're doing a very good thing. Distorted righteousness that ends up doing awful actions. But they've grown up in, again, this simplistic world with social media. I mean, Google has these what is Google's model? Is it don't be evil or don't do evil? That sounds like kindergarten. Don't be evil. When you apply those simplicities to human beings, you always end up with a bad social environment. And if you ask people who work at Google, they will tell you this place is nuts. There are social justice zealots who, boy, you better not cross them, as James Damore did, the engineer who got fired from Google a few years ago, because that little manifesto of his. You ask insiders in Silicon Valley, where the woke has become so powerful, they'll say, this place is so fixated on identity, racial, sexual, gender identity that, everyone just learns to, try to get by without getting into it with any of these people. That's where the dangerousness comes in. You want to tell them, look, read ancient Greek drama. Read about Caesar crossing the Rubicon. And the senators realizing this is an emperor, he's a problem. Something has to be done. I mean, read the Sermon on the Mount. Read Genesis. Try to understand. Why did Cain kill Abel? Why was he envious? Why did he covet the love that God seemed to be showing to him instead of to Cain? These are things that will deepen the moral sensibility. Step back from this, again, this woke fervor that you feel. Again, that is up to the mentors. It's up to the teachers. And I don't know if we can step back into the 33-year-old millennials' life, because one of the things that makes you grow up is having kids, right? I mean, that made me grow up a lot. I had to stop thinking about myself so much. A little sacrifice, because I may have to get up and get on an airplane at 8 a.m, but if my son is got a temperature, I'm up with him all night. You just do it. And that can curb a lot of these kinds of political passions. The indignation that you feel. Well, what so-and-so said, that's all. We got to do something about that. I've got kids at home I got to feed, right? I got to do my taxes. I don't have time for this. But again, they're not getting married at the rates of before. They're not having children. 1/3 of millennial men will not have gotten married ever by age 40, and probably never will, which is much higher rate than the boomers were at. And so there's a certain prolonged adolescence that is going on there that will resist the deeper knowledge, let's just say the tragic sense of life.
So what do you see as the future manifestations of millennial control over politics, policy, and culture? Where does this go?
One key to this may be Generation Z, right? The generation that is coming after the millennials, because the 19-year-old doesn't want to listen to the 33-year-old social justice scold tell him that he's committed a thought crime of some kind. And that Gen Z is going to have to rebel in some way, I think, against the woke push, because it's not a happy condition. The identity politics don't make people feel joy. More it's anxiety and fear and nervousness that goes with identity politics, unless you're in, the seat where you get to be the instrument of judgment. That's a very powerful position to be in, but not everyone can be in that position. In fact, very few can be in that position. So as Gen Z ages, as millennials get older, when they hit their 40s and 50s, I mean, the bloom is already gone on the millennials. I mean, even the term, you're the millennials, it sounds so epochal. Well, that's gone for them. The realities of paying bills and finding places to live, that kind of killed that enthusiasm. as they get older and Gen Z comes up, we'll see what kind of relationships go on between that generation. My concern is that Gen Z, instead of growing up as millennials were with all the cheerleading going on, you're amazing, doing amazing thing with these tools, Gen Z experiences the tools more as a form of surveillance. They feel they're under scrutiny, the ambitious ones. And the pipeline into the elite is now watched over very carefully. They're going to look at your tweets before they hire you. They're going to go back through your social media, your pictures. Is there something here that's going to be, embarrassing to us? The college will rescind an admission offer. This has happened. If they get evidence of you posting something on Instagram that is too wickedly politically incorrect. The worry is that the ambitious Zers who want to get that top college, that great internship, that great job, grad school, that they're just going to keep their heads down. They're just going to stay quiet, do their work, and try to go along with the increasing forms of social control that we see in our society.
Mark, if people want to get a copy of The Dumbest Generation Grows Up or follow your efforts online, how can they do that?
I do podcasts at First Things Magazine twice a week, focused on books mostly. It's firstthings.com, and I write there a lot. And, of course, the book, Barnes & Noble at Amazon. It goes on out this week. It's in the bookstores now. But Barnes & Noble and Amazon, they have a nice discount on the book. But let me say this, Rob, when I wrote the first book, I got a lot of emails, a lot of angry emails from young people, with the title of a book that insults 93 million Americans. And I responded to every single one, because if you're going to throw out a grenade, you got to stand up and face the heat that comes back at you. And I'm happy. I'm actually happy. I get people writing to me a lot. What do I do with my kids? What books do I? And I'm happy to respond. And my name is unusual enough so that I'm very easy to find online in terms of my contact, my Emory University email and my First Things email. So I encourage your listeners, if they have some serious questions, they can bounce them at me.
I hope they will, and it's a wonderful thing that you're doing to reach out to your audience. Mark Bauerlein, thank you so much for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thank you, Rob.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at shillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.